All right, good morning and welcome to the October 21st, 2020 meeting of the Lextran Board of Directors. My name is Jill Barnett. I want to read the COVID statement prior to beginning. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic state of emergency and governor's executive orders regarding social distancing, this meeting of the Lextran Board of Directors is being held via live video teleconference pursuant to Senate 150, signed by the governor on March 30th, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 20-05 in accordance with KRS 61.826 because it was not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. I would also like to add that today during the public comment section of the agenda, the chat feature on WebEx will be available for comment. Once we have moved beyond that portion of the agenda, the chat feature will be disabled on WebEx. If you have comments, you are welcome to send those to info@lextran.com. I will now turn the meeting over to Chairman Christian Motley.
Thanks, Jill. Good morning, everybody. I'll just get a quick, I don't know, I've not asked this before, if it's necessary for me to actually take roll, or if I can just name the folks I see and call out the folks I don't. Because I see George, I see Harding, I see Jamie. I'm here. Rick is here. And I think Adrian is missing. And Joe is missing.
This is Adrian. I'm here.
Hey, Adrian.
Hey. Oh, my camera's not on. My bad.
I see you now. And so we're good. We have quorum and we can move forward. Before we get going, is there just leave space for public comment on today's agenda? We'll move on. We'll move on to the minutes from last month's meeting. Take a second and scroll through if you need to, but we'll entertain a motion to approve.
This is Rick. I'll make the motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Adrian, I'll second.
All in favor, say aye or show us your thumb.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. I have just a quick chair's report to share on three quick topics. The first is just a follow-up to, I mentioned that we had a meeting with representatives from Lexington's chapter of the AACP prior to last month's meeting. I just want to follow up and say, I've had conversations with Jill, and we're working to respond to those concerns. But we have a number of recommendations and steps that we can take. I know that Jill has already had conversations with McBrayer, and I think TransDev may have some resources just to help us think about these next steps. I do think in terms of the conversations that happen to implement some of the recommendations for employees, that we place those. My hope is that it'll be on an agenda for the Labor Management Committee or in the upcoming collective bargaining process. I know I don't know which one would come first, but I want to make sure to highlight the existing channels that exist for our union employees to talk with our leadership. We did send a communication back to NAACP, basically just thanking them for bringing those items to our attention. But we also had to communicate that we're required to actually discuss employee policies and conditions directly with the union, just per the collective bargaining agreement. And so we shared that. But they did also bring up some equity concerns around the transit routes, and that is definitely a conversation that we can have with them. And we offered that opportunity because we want to resolve those concerns as well. So that's NAACP. I cannot remember, and somebody stopped me if I have mentioned this already, but have we talked about Peggy's resignation? Peggy Henson, as you all know, has served on the Lextran board, but she shared with Jill and I that she was going to need to step away from the board. And that was actually prior to last month's meeting, and I wasn't sure if I got a chance to bring that up or if we brought that before the board. But I don't see anybody raising eyebrows, so I don't think I got to mention that. I just want to say a quick thank you for again not just her service to this board, but the service she's given to the city of Lexington for years. The transition of Peggy from the board leaves a vacancy. And I just say just a quick reminder that the board appointments come from the mayor's office. And so, we'll just follow their process and hope to have that vacancy filled as soon as possible. There are folks, I do know there are folks who have applied and are in the queue to be considered. And so it's just a matter of the mayor's office doing that vetting and sharing with us a recommendation. The last note is just on TransDev. And so later this morning, we have a resolution to confirm Jill Barnett as the general manager. That would leave an opening for the assistant general manager role. And so I just want to flag that TransDev has, similar to the way they posted the GM role, they have posted the AGM role and are currently recruiting candidates. And so we look for, of course, as you know, TransDev again vets those candidates. I expect Jill to have input on that process, and then a recommended candidate will be presented to the board. I'll just name my interest in, just that there's, get strong recruitment process that presents a diverse set of candidates for us to get a recommendation from. So that's it for my report. Any questions on those items?
Christian, I have one question. This is Harding. You mentioned a discussion of equity around route planning.
Yeah.
Is that a conversation within AACP that is on the books that we can be involved in, or is we just, what's the status of that conversation?
It is not on the books. I mean, I do think it's a relevant conversation for us to just have as a board, but there's not a meeting on the books. But if you're Harding, are you raising your hand saying you're interested in participating in that kind of a discussion?
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's get that in the minutes. Yeah. So when we get that on the books, my hope is that we can get one on the books and have those concerns. Just a note, on what we shared back with them, the routes, are typically determined, and Jill, let me know if I speak out of turn, but it's a data-driven process, driven by ridership. But we understand that in data there are numbers and narrative, and want to make sure that if there are gaps, that we meet those. So, Harding, we'll take you down.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no more questions, we'll move to the Finance Committee report.
Thanks, Christian. Let everyone know that the Finance Committee met on September 30th. And in a few minutes, I'll turn this over to Crow, who will take you through the high points of the fiscal year 2020 audit. But I wanted to let everybody know that Jamie Rogers, Rick Crispin, and I had a very thorough discussion. I think it went over an hour on the Lextran financials with the Crow audit team, as well as Jill and Nikki. So before we get to the audit, I wanted to talk about a couple other things that we talked about. One was the CARES money, and the fact that it has steadied the long-term cash flow estimates for Lextran, which is a good thing. Therefore, Lextran's long-term debt refinancing is no longer a front burner issue like it had been. And so the Finance Committee recommended to staff that Lextran should not award a contract for refinancing our long-term debt. That's an area that we will continue to look at future meetings. We talked about use of our cash and that we needed to wait a few months to see if there's any changes in the property tax collections due to the pandemic. And so we'll know that here in the next month or so. And we talked about being more intentional about putting back money for long-term capital spending, including future improvements to the Lextran facilities as well as fleet replacements. And then we had a brief conversation on fare collection, which, we talked about at the last board meeting as well. And, one of the things that I wanted to say is that, and this goes back to something that Rick said, the board did not make the decision to stop collecting fares. And we do need clear communication from the staff on when fares will be collected again. So if, there is any board action to be taken, it's if we think that staff is not moving as quickly as they need to. So I just want to say something about the vote at the last meeting. We talked about directing staff to start collecting fares again in November. And Rick and I, and now Jamie, understand the long-term financial situation at Lextran at least as well, and probably better than any of the other board members. So, when we bring something forward to the board to vote on like that, I think we probably need to maybe have a more thorough discussion of what it means. So I just want to say this about fares. And if you think about it in terms of, what we can do with that money. So in a typical year, the fare collection is about $1.3 million. And Jill recently sent out the fact that, we received this Volkswagen settlement money from the state, which requires a 50-50 match. And then our normal match from federal grant funds to buy a bus is a 20% match. So those funds, if we just think of them in terms of fleet replacement, helps us, replace, 4 to 5 buses a year. And so, my reason for, putting forth the motion last time was to try to hit a window to start collecting fares before we got into the holiday season. And, we missed that window, obviously, because we do need to give the public ample notice of when we'll collect fares again. So, in my mind anyway, it's probably not logical to get started until January now. So we have missed November, December, and possibly part of January. Not to mention that we haven't collected since March. Okay, so with that, at the meeting, I thank Nikki for the work that she does. And those of you that are on the board for a while have probably heard me say this before. I serve as the finance chair of a couple of different boards right now and have on most of the boards I've ever been on. And Nikki is the one person that when you ask her a question, she knows the answer right then. And it's so helpful. In some of my other boards, it's, we'll have to get back to you, tomorrow or after the meeting or whatever, so we can look that up. But Nikki does a great job with that. So I wanted to give her praise. And then,
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then, Scott with Crow is also a great resource for Lextran. His experiences with various transit industry clients around the country. And so we use our time with him, not only to talk about Lextran and what we did last year, but also to talk about how we can improve and learn from things that he sees elsewhere. So we're very appreciative for that as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to review the fiscal year audit.
Thanks, George. Good morning, everyone. My objective here today is to give you an overview of the June 30, 2020 audit. As George indicated, we do a very detailed review of the financial statements at the committee level. And also, as he indicated, we talk about industry trends and what's happening out there with some of your peers, both smaller, larger, and similar size organizations. I wanted to point out, related to Nikki, Nikki also participates in our National Transit Finance Roundtable. So she's able to get direct feedback from her peers across the country as well, in addition to listening to what I think. So I think that's a nice balance, and we appreciate her participating at that national level and bringing back some of those ideas to Lextran.
Thank you.
Yep. As far as the audit goes, on the screen, if you could go to page 16, PDF 16, please. We issue an opinion on your financial statements, both at the financial statement level, your fiduciary activities, which is your pension, And then also we provide an opinion on your single audit, which is the federal expenditures that you have each year. We're happy to report that we issued a clean opinion or unmodified opinion, which is something you should expect, but it's really the investment you make throughout the year to get to that situation each year when we report. So clean opinion on the financials, on the single audit, and on your fiduciary activities related to the pension. If you could go to page 27, I think. There we go. For your reference, this is the statement of net position or the balance sheet. And, you know, it's interesting. A lot of times throughout the year, transit agencies are always thinking about the income statement. What's the budget to actual? What are the revenues? What are the expenses? But it's always important to step back periodically and look at the balance sheet and say, what is our cash position? You know, who owes us money? Is it timing issues or are there other issues involved? What is our debt? How are we going to finance our debt? You know, things like that. The balance sheet gives you a good one day in time view on June 30th, gives you an idea of the assets, liabilities, and the equity that you have in the organization. As you can see, that you have about $72 million in assets. Majority of those assets are tied into your capital assets. It's a net value of about 34 million. And then you have cash and receivables that are about 20 million. Those are the biggest parts of your assets. When you look at your liabilities, it's really a focus on the notes payable. Notes payable are really linked to the new market tax credit program that you're involved in. And I believe the net amount that you'll have to physically pay out at the end of that agreement is around $5 million. So those are really the big hit ticket items we look at, is managing your cash flow, looking at how to deal with your debt, whether you want to consider paying it off early or consider paying it down, or what are the pros and cons of doing that. Another item is related to pensions. And your pension plan, in the scheme of things relative to other organizations across the country, is very well funded. That's a single employer plan. So there's really not a significant impact on your financials overall compared to other transit agencies across the country. And what that means is that you've been able to fund the plan based on the actuarial recommendations consistently over time to try to stay in balance with the benefits that you've promised to your people. Your overall net position is about $50 million. It's broken down into two pieces. One is the capital assets less any related debt, which is 22 million. And then your unrestricted net position is 27.9 million. When we talk about unrestricted net position, it doesn't mean that you have $27 million to spend. What it means is that of all the assets you own and all the liabilities, those are the resources that you could liquidate over time to provide resources for the organization. One of the things that we talked about, as George alluded to, is thinking about the balance sheet, thinking about cash flow, and thinking about the concept of having a potential policy on operating reserves and a potential policy on capital reserves. As you all know, you do a lot of planning as it relates to your capital needs over a 5, 10, and sometimes even 20-year period. But right now, you don't have a reserve policy that says what type of cash do we want to maintain or do we want to set aside to help us to maybe fund the matching requirements or to fund, you know, portions of projects or whole projects in connection with any other resources you might have available, or resources or state funds or the settlements that were referred to. So we think that's an important thing to consider going forward is, are there thresholds that you'd like to set goals for and maintain? Those thresholds then would be part of your budgeting process to say, if we would like to set aside, for this is hypothetical, not a number I'm recommending, if we wanted to set aside $100,000 a year, you know, you'd have to budget for that like an expense, and then you would put that cash aside. So that's just an example of something that the committee and management should look at as a best practice going forward. If you could go to the next page, please. This next page represents the revenues and expenses of the organization. And you can see it's broken down into a couple different categories. We have one category called operating revenues, which is essentially your fare revenue and any advertising and fuel refunds and other miscellaneous revenue. So basically your operating revenue, what you generate from customers or from the active bus activity. The second category is operating expenses, 27.4 million. That's really the bulk of your expenses on providing those passenger fares. As you can see, as you can see with your organization, as well as every transit agency across the country, every transit agency has an operating loss because of the way that operating revenues are subsidized by other resources. So the non-operating revenues and expenses section, which is about $28 million, shows how do you fill that gap. You're heavily reliant on your property tax revenues and on federal operating assistance. You can see that that's the bulk of those revenues that are available to offset the expenses of operating your system. And then lastly, there's a capital component to the federal assistance called capital contributions, which is about 1.2 million. That is money that you have specifically used to purchase capital assets. So it's not treated as supporting your operations, but more treating your capital project budget. So overall, the change in net position was about 5.1 million for the year. If you think about your organization as well as other organizations across the country, a change in net position really is tied to many different things. It can be tied to timing of cash flows. It can be due to timing of depreciation, timing of your new market tax credit, et cetera. So if you're looking at your budget, most of the time you guys are budgeting, I would call it on a modified accrual cash type basis. So the results of your budget to actual may look different than the GAAP budget to actual. And what I recommend to the committee is really thinking about your budget as where are your resources coming from and how are you going to pay for them. And typically it's viewed more on a cash basis or understanding what cash resources we have available, whether it's existing cash balances or revenue you're generating throughout the year, less the expenses that you plan to incur during the year. So there really is a difference, I guess, between what the GAAP financials are and how you think about your use of resources throughout the year. So it's hard to make a direct connection. I always recommend that looking at the budget from the standpoint of how we're going to utilize the cash we have and how we're going to utilize the new monies that are coming during the year is a very important process. Related to the rest of the financial, I told Nikki this would be short and sweet, and I'm probably hitting my deadline there, but the financial disclosures I think are important for people to read. I just don't think it'd be of value to walk through today, but I do encourage you as board members or other people interested in Lextran to take time to read through the financials and get an understanding of all the things that management is dealing with throughout the year. And also just gives you a little more information to help you educate yourself on the finances of the organization. And as George indicated, obviously the better that each of you understand the financial decisions that have to be made and the complexities of operating a transit agency, I think this makes you better board members as well. So I encourage everyone to look at those financials and ask questions and really have a good dialogue, because there are many different decisions you can make. It's not always one perfect decision, but going through a thoughtful process is very important to understand what your choices are. I'd be happy to answer any questions that board members may have at this time.
I have a question for Nikki. Nikki, would you say that in a non-COVID year that our passenger fare revenue is more like 3 million, 3.1 million?
Passenger revenue, I would say in a normal year would be about 1.5.
Okay, but it says here.
That's the Kentucky contract.
That includes the University of Kentucky.
Oh, okay. So that's included in passenger. Okay,
yes.
So the fare revenue is 1.3. Okay.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's a good question, Rick. I think from a 2020 standpoint, your fare revenues for the last quarter of the year were down significantly. And I think the other thing to look at is what has happened from July until now from a fare revenue standpoint. To look at your budget to see whether your budget contemplated those declines and determine whether there are other decisions to make in the current year related to your budget and how you're going to use your CARES Act funding as well.
Christian. Y'all can hear me? This is Jamie. Can you all hear me?
Agreed.
Yep. So I wanted to say from what I learned from the Finance Committee, extremely helpful. I really appreciate having the auditor with their background in transit. One thing that was informative to me is it was unique for our transit authority to rely so much on property tax, which actually put us in a really good place during COVID, having a tax source that wasn't as volatile as a sales tax or as an income tax. So I don't know if I thought that was really informative if our auditor could kind of just inform the board on that, how we're comparing to some of our other transit authorities.
Yes, property taxes have been less volatile because of consumption taxes like sales tax and income tax or things like that other entities use. I think the risk, and Jamie, I think you pointed this out, is there's a lag. So there's still a risk out there of the lag of impact of COVID or other economic issues on property taxes long term. And I think you guys actually have some experts that you've actually brought in to provide you feedback about what risk may exist, if any, related to property taxes in the future.
Yeah, I think that's something else we talked about in the Finance Committee is a lot of the predictions is not that this year will be heavily impacted, but FY21, FY22, FY23 is where we'll see the largest impact because property tax and commercial buildings take a long time to change their value. And we're going to bring in the property of value administrator in future meetings. So thank you again for that very informative finance call.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, well, thank you everyone and enjoy the rest of the meeting. And we really enjoy working with Lextran. And I actually have the privilege to keep working with Carrie as well because I work with TARC. So we wish Carrie the best of luck at TARC. And I guess I can share war stories maybe if both of you let me. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks,
Scott.
Yeah, let me follow up with one thing that Scott talked about on setting a policy for long-term capital. We did put money in the budget this year. Nikki, what was it? Was it 250,000?
Yes.
And that was something that, Rick asked us to have that in there. If you look at our depreciation for a year, it's a lot of money. And theoretically, that's the amount of money you need to replace your assets. And so, we fall far short of that number as far as what our capital reserve thoughts are now. But just know that the committee will continue to talk about that and set a clear policy so that we can have Lextran set up, far into the future with the amounts of money that it's going to need. So with that, Christian, that's the end of my report. And if any of the board members have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, George. Any questions?
So, George, this is Adrienne. I wanted to ask a couple questions. The first was about your statement in the beginning in terms of the impact of fare collection. Are there models or can a model be run to take a look at if we start collecting in, January or February, or if we collect 50% fare or whatever the case may be? I know that, generally the board doesn't get that far down in the weeds, but in terms of determining if we need to take action, is there some place that we can look to see what the actual impact is? Because I think that's my greatest concern. What is the actual impact to both the ridership as well as our budget? So that's my first question.
Right now, when we look at our long-term cash, we bleed off about $1 million a year right now. And so, not having the fare collection, that's another over $1 million a year. So those are the things that I'm concerned about. Now, I did make the comment because of the CARES money. It's changed the long-term dynamic quite a bit. And I would have been really worried had that not happened. I was already really worried, prior to that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of helped steady the ship, so to speak. And so now we just need to keep an eye on it and see what other changes might happen on the revenue side. and then we'll be better prepared for what impact that really does have. But anything that we don't collect in fares is just more money in the red.
Okay.
I'd like to point out I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Rick.
Just to kind of put that in perspective, our fee of $1 a ride, I would say, is really quite low compared to other transit systems, and we haven't increased our fare for at least 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that, and I hope we can go the next 20 years at $1. But I've always been a person who, I guess, argued against fare increases, and I hope we can keep it that way.
Yeah, and I think that definitely goes for me as well. And I haven't polled Jamie to see what her feelings are on it, but and Harding asked the question at the last meeting about what if it was zero? That's a great ideal to get to if we had the money to get there. And so right now we don't, but it is pretty awesome, as Rick mentioned, that we've been collecting $1 for 20 years.
Sure, absolutely. And the impacts of not collecting $1 over time, when we do start collecting, does that mean we have to raise in order to stay in a viable position or not? I don't know. That's just a hypothetical for thought type of question. But my second question was just a little clarification on the policy regarding reserves. So I understand we don't currently have one. Is that something that the committee would draft and then bring to the board, or is that fully operational?
The committee definitely should draft something, and my feeling is, we should direct the staff to adhere to whatever policy it is that we come up with.
Sure, I'm in favor of reserve policies just in general. Yeah. So okay, thank you.
Yeah.
A quick flag that I think Jill and the team are going to share an update on fare collection later in the agenda.
George, I just wanted to mention one other thing. I think we're talking about reserve policy. It's two things. One, about what you want to fund from your operating budget to set aside. It's also how you plan to use the cash that you have on hand. So that would be two different ways of thinking about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Otherwise, we'll move to resolutions. George, thank you, and big thanks to the Finance Committee and Scott and the team at Crow. Y'all always take good care of us, so we're grateful. So I will move to the action items again. I don't want to move too quickly. If somebody wants to jump in, okay. The first resolution I can speak to briefly. The group will know that in the last meeting, we had a resolution that was to approve of Jill taking the role of general manager in an interim role. In the time since that meeting, TransDev, and they shared with us at that meeting, Justin, I don't think he's hopped on this meeting yet. We thought he might make an appearance. He still may. But Justin from TransDev shared their process and that they would post the GM position, vet the applications, and then share a recommendation with us. Again, in the time since, you all probably would have seen, they did post. Justin did email us and share that Jill was the lone applicant and the recommended applicant from TransDev. And so we have this resolution in front of us today to approve Jill as the resident general manager. There in the resolution, in the memo itself, there are just some biographical points on Jill. I think we had a great deal of discussion last go around, but of course, if there are any questions, we'll entertain those. If not, we'll entertain a motion to move forward.
Christian, I would quickly call call the board's attention to this particular page. Just for the statement of clarification, I wanted to add that there were some slight edits that were made to the actual resolution here that you see on the screen versus what was sent to you in your packet on Friday. Those edits were in the second paragraph. So following the second whereas, previously that said Lextran. We have clarified that to say the Transit Authority of Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. That meets or follows the standard language of many of our other resolutions. And the final paragraph, the now therefore be it resolved, previously said be and hereby is approved, now says is hereby approved, and previously stated the preamble to this resolution be and the same is incorporated, and now it just says the preamble to this resolution is incorporated herein. Those were some clarifications that Ann Tyler and I made yesterday, following some feedback from a board member.
Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome.
Is there any discussion, any questions or motion?
I make a motion to approve resolution 2020-23.
Is there a second? Thanks, George. The second from Jamie. All in favor, say aye or show your thumbs.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations, Jill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Christian, let me add something here, because I had this conversation with both Jill and Christian yesterday. You know, we need an assistant general manager now, and that's part of our contract with TransDev is that they provide that. So Nikki told me yesterday that since we've been running without one, that we will get a credit from TransDev for the amount of time that we don't have one. And then the other thing that I asked Jill to do is to get with TransDev and ensure that they recruit, not post and hope, but recruit some people with diversity, so that, you know, when the time comes to make a choice of who our assistant general manager is, there are some diverse candidates in the pool.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that. I think it is very important to make sure that leadership in the organization reflects, if not the makeup of our community, but if nothing else, the makeup of our staff.
Thank you.
We can move to that next resolution, Jill.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry, I thought it was muted for a second. The next resolution in your packet today is Resolution 2020-24, and this is to award a contract for a tire lease. Again, I did want to, on the next page in the actual language of the resolution, call your attention to one change. The resolution you received on Friday in your packet stated that the board directs the interim general manager. We previously had the resolutions in a different order. We have since changed that to say that the board directs the general manager. So with that, that is what you will see on the following page. But we issued this RFP back in July for a contract for a tire lease. Tire lease is something that is pretty standard to both Lextran as well as transit agencies throughout the country. We know that TARC in Louisville has traditionally done a tire lease, SORTA in Cincinnati. Obviously, they're a larger system, but they do it as well. And I'm fairly certain that Tank in Northern Kentucky leases their tires as well. We received 3 responsive proposals from the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, Bridgestone, and Michelin. And our evaluation committee ranked those proposals and is recommending award to the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. That is the incumbent right now. We started our current contract with them back in 2016, and it expires at the end of the year. So we are asking for the board's direction and approval to enter into contract with Goodyear for our tire lease.
Thanks, Jill. Any questions or motion?
Motion to approve by Jamie. And I will note we asked the auditor, and he also said that was a very common practice among the transit authorities he worked with.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Rick, I'll second.
Thanks, Rick. All in favor, say aye or thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We have one more resolution today, and that resolution is 2020-25. This resolution is to approve a change order for Gillig, and this is for an order of buses that was previously approved by the board back in February. So resolution 2020-02 in February approved the purchase of two 40-foot low floor extended range buses. When we did that resolution and approved those, we did not include the cost of the extended battery warranty, and the cost of that exceeds my signing authority. So that is the purpose of today's resolution, to approve a change order. There are some other very small changes that we would like to make on that order related to the DVR hard drives and related to a wheelchair securement device. So we have coupled those things together. The total cost of the changes is $175,142. We do have this money as part of the original 5339 Lono grant, and today we are requesting the board's approval on this change order. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
I move to approve resolution 2020 or is this an amendment to a resolution 2020-02? I'm just confused by the numbering. Sorry.
This would be a new resolution because the entire change order has to be approved. So we would just couple this with the existing purchase order. So this is 2020-25.
Okay. I move to approve 2020-25 as an amendment.
Thanks, Harvey. Is there a second?
It's Adrian, second.
Thanks, Adrian. Everyone in favor or say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Thank you. The motion carries.
All right. Thank you.
And just a quick flag. I mean, Jill talked about a couple of adjustments that were made to the resolutions. I do think it's helpful anytime you're reading one of the resolutions and it maybe is unclear, or certainly if you catch typos or anything like that, please do flag those, because it helps us. As you know, we did some wordsmithing last go around. It keeps us from having to do that kind of work in the meeting. So thank you all for taking a thorough reading of the resolutions. We can move.
Christian,
Please.
if you may, or if I may, there is the next agenda item is the performance report and financials, and then it is followed by a small change order report. If you'd like, I can go ahead and do that change order report, so we're just talking about all the money at the same time.
Oh, that's fine.
So on page 79 of your packet, which I believe is on the screen, that is related to another bus purchase that we did at that same February meeting. So resolution 2020-01 resolved the purchase of 4 CNG buses. Again, there was a small change. The total amount of the change is $3,476, which is in my signing authority, but is something that we would report to the board. We would report that change. And that, again, is related to the DVR and hard drive system. So we're making a slight change to that on the CNG buses that we are purchasing. So just reporting that for information to the board this evening, or this morning, rather. I guess I'm used to our night meetings. And with that, if there are no questions, we can get back into the agenda.
Any questions there? Let's push ahead.
All right. We will now get into the performance report. This month, I'm going to let Fred Combs have the pleasure of doing our performance report this month, and to assist me.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let me grab control of the screen. All right, so this morning I'll go through the September 2020 performance report. As we, start with our mission statement, we serve people in our community with mobility solutions. So some highlights for for September 2020. We talked about the audit before. That's always something that we're pleased to brag about. We completed the fiscal year 2020 audit with no findings. Another point that we were very proud of is there were no preventable accidents on fixed route or paratransit in September of 2020. We received 6 commendations over the past month. And a very interesting little finding that I saw in our ridership numbers, Labor Day was the highest traveled holiday on our fixed route system in the past 3 years. So hopefully maybe that's a little silver lining, a glimmer of hope that our ridership is ready to come back full force. But to kind of jump into what the ridership looks like in September, we're still seeing that same trend that we've seen since April. We're slowly, steadily kind of returning back. When we compare that to the average of what we'd expect to see, we're starting to flatten out, and that'll show up in a chart in a couple slides from now. But that slow, steady sort of growth, we hope to continue. This is the first month that we've had over 200,000 trips since March. So that's another good sign, hopefully a sign of good things to come. On the paratransit side, the recovery there has been a little quicker. Of course, the depth of the drop in ridership wasn't quite as deep as it was in fixed route. Again, a slow but steady increase. We're getting closer and closer back to where we would normally expect to be. And this chart is our percent change relative to our monthly average, and that's where you can see both systems, the fixed route in gray and the paratransit in green, as they compare to where we would sort of expect to see with a monthly average. These past 4 months from June to September on the fixed route, you see it kind of flattens out, and that's the trend that we see. What we'd expect to see through the semester, August and September, has increased, but our recovery has been sort of that steady, slow climb up. So that's the effect that you get there, that flattening out. On the paratransit side, we are seeing that tick back up. I'm getting closer and closer to where we would expect to be. Still a long way to go, but we are making some progress. Our system productivity in September is about what you would expect. Again, first month we've seen more than 200,000 trips since March. Most of the other things are below what we saw last year. That's to be expected, due to the effects of the pandemic, both in terms of the fixed route system and on wheels. Safety for the month of September, again, very proud to see there were no preventable accidents. Injury frequency rate, days with no preventable accidents, those are lining up pretty well with what we saw last year. So I think things are looking, pretty standard, pretty normal on the safety side of things. For maintenance, last month we completed all 47 of our preventive maintenance inspections on time, which is, it's kind of what we hope to do. But to take that a step further, if we look at the entire fiscal year, we are 128 of 128 on our preventive maintenance inspections. So for the first quarter of this year, we are a perfect 100%. So kudos to our maintenance department for that. I'm going to share with you some service improvements we are talking about for December. The big one is the bay assignments at the transit center, and this is to get ahead of that town branch construction that we've talked about for the past couple of months. So we've looked at a plan of how we are going to sort of rearrange our operations down there to make sure that we have the safest, the most efficient flow that we can at the transit center. We're going to be going, we'll certainly take this out to the public, get some feedback, and hope to put this plan in place in December. We expect construction near the transit center to occur starting in January, February of next year. Along with that, we've noticed an increase in demand in the afternoon on Route 8 and Versailles Road. So we're looking at supplementing that service temporarily, about 6 trips on weekdays to kind of help smooth that demand out. We're addressing a safety concern on a stop inbound Richmond Road that is near the development that holds Southland Christian Church, Home Depot, and those surrounding businesses. So there'll be a very minor route adjustment and moving a stop from Richmond Road into this commercial development. On Route 22 Mercer Road, there's a minor time point adjustment. this will help operational efficiency and it might improve connectivity between Mercer Road and Newtown Pike. There's no stop eliminations, very, very minor schedule adjustments. So this is a small tweak that will hopefully improve some of our operations and customer connections.
Fred?
Yes, sir.
I've just got one question just about service improvements because of the conversation that I started with Carrie. And I think she mentioned she would talk to you about it, Leestown, with the new multifamily unit over there. Are we looking at that? Making that?
We are. And that is a new development in Meadowthorpe that is behind. There's a commercial strip. I know Apollo Pizza is there. It's a pretty wonderful place to eat. So there's a development behind that is a new housing facility that, from what I understand, is pretty close to capacity in terms of housing there. So we are looking at how the stop that we have that's on Forbes and Leestown, what that would look like if we were to move it back closer to that facility. Okay. So we're certainly taking that into consideration.
And Chairman, that's a conversation I have had with the council member as well, and shared that with Mr. Combs, and we have also shared that with the consultants that are kicking off our COA.
Perfect.
Has our discussion with Greyhound as far as leasing a bay at the transit center, I guess that's moribund, not going on?
It is going on.
It's a little slow,
okay,
but it is ongoing.
And that is a consideration as we, looked at the bay assignments and how we operate at the transit center. Greyhound's impact was certainly part of that conversation. Okay, so our driver barrier updates for this month. We have completed 58 of 67 vehicles. We got some operator feedback about glare on the materials that we were using. So we found an anti-glare material that best way I think I know to explain it works kind of like a window tint in a way. So there's an application on top of the barrier that helps with the glare. The vehicles that we have remaining required additional fabrication due to the configuration of the space in the front passenger walkway. So we knocked out the ones that we knew we could knock out quickly. This last 9 or so are a little more challenging and take a little more time, but we do anticipate that we will complete the installation of the barriers, including that anti-glare material, within about 3 weeks. And so that sort of leads into the discussion that we had last month and then earlier this morning about fare collection, resuming fare collection, and then what we're talking about, the Healthy On Board Phase 4. And these are sort of the steps that we are planning to take ahead of resuming fare collection. And the first step that we've talked about is the completion of those barriers. So we expect to have that wrapped up in a couple of weeks. At that point, we can go back to front door boarding. And what that will allow us to do is get everyone sort of used to, the customers used to using the bus the way that they used to. So going back to the front door, that's where the fare boxes are. That's where the interaction with the operators happen. We've been in rear door boarding for so long. It's nice to go ahead and get that started earlier and let that shift kind of take effect before we start collecting fares again. We've had a couple of positions in maintenance and customer service that dealt closely with fare collection that had opened up over the past few months. It's a natural sort of evolution, in staffing. We had not filled those seats because part of the job description was to work with fare collection, be at the fare boxes and pass sales. So we will need to backfill those positions. That is underway. The positions are posted. Hopefully we can get people hired around the middle of November. Also, we need to take a long look at quality assurance and quality control testing of our fare boxes. We will do that through November, and that's to make sure that once we do, start putting the heavy load on the fare boxes, they don't all break at once. We kind of can smooth that out and catch any potential issues before we get to the fare collection, starting back up again. The next thing is to begin our passenger and agency outreach. We need to give the community time to budget, be it a personal budget or an agency budget, if they do purchase passes from us, to make sure that they are notified well in advance, they have time to prepare, and then we can also share with them the dates when things are going to happen. We will need to do some internal training and refreshing on fare collection for operations and customer service. Get everybody back in the habit of doing the things that we need to do to make sure fare collection goes as smoothly as possible. And then all of that lines up with we'll begin selling passes again on December 14th. That will give a few weeks. Certainly have the holidays mixed in there a few weeks before we officially begin selling fares again. And our recommendation on that is January the 4th. So in coming up with this plan, we did reach out to local organizations and found that they have noticed an increase in the need for their services to the clients that they provide services to. This includes youth agencies, senior services, health services, and they sort of provided us feedback like not having fares over the past few months has been beneficial to the people that they serve. So there is an additional effect, an additional benefit for having suspended fares throughout the first few months of the pandemic. I know there was a question before about can we sort of model or think about what we might lose depending on when we go back to collecting fares, and I did provide some of that information here on some charts. Fiscal year 2020 and 2021 through September, that's using actual ridership. The fiscal year 2021 chart at the bottom, that is estimated ridership and estimated revenue loss. So best guess that I could possibly do, I think if we follow this plan and as we're recommending here, January 4th, our revenue loss between October 1st and December 31st would be about $116,000. So I'm happy to field any questions about how I come up with these numbers or about the plan we've set forth or the things that we need to do ahead of resuming fare collection. I'm happy to take those.
Thanks, Brett. Any questions?
I think it's a good plan, Fred.
Thank you.
I like it. Thank you for sharing that with us. I particularly like the focus on customer service so that staff are prepared to handle reactions from the public as well as to execute their jobs well.
Thank you all for that. And thank you, Fred, for presenting. And I would just like to say thank you to the staff as a whole. As we discussed this and walked through. It was very, I should say, much easier to flip the switch and go fare free than it was to think about all of the things that we needed to consider as we reinstated the fares. As Fred mentioned, there are people in customer service right now that are employed that have never sold a fare. We had not backfilled a position when someone went off on medical leave. We lost someone to another position in the maintenance department that worked very heavily with our fare collection system, and so we had been able to do without that position for a little while. And then also the consideration for our customers who will be the most impacted. So we walked through all of those things, figured out all of the things that we needed to do and what was realistic to do this well. And that is how we got to this recommendation, and hope that this meets the pleasure of the board.
Thanks, Jill. I just wanted to say one last thing and I agree with everyone that it feels well thought out and even I think meets an interest that George mentioned earlier. I do appreciate, and I think I mentioned this to Jill, but it sounds like you all might have already been thinking about it or planning for it. But I've liked the phase in, healthy on board frame for how you've talked with the public about what this looks like to phase back in, and using this as a phase 4, just it stays consistent, and I think is again it sort of pulls that thread all the way through for our riders. So I appreciate that sort of consistency, and again it feels very thought out. and follows that phased-in approach that you all have been discussing. Any other thoughts here or questions for Fred?
Yeah, I have one comment, one question. So the comment on Labor Day that you said had the high ridership, UK had class that day. So is that what impacted them?
I think that's part of it. I don't know. UK is the biggest example of maybe Labor Day wasn't as celebrated this year as it normally is. So maybe some of those riders are typical workers doing a typical day. I'm not exactly sure I can pinpoint what happened, but I think UK had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, what UK did for staff, they gave them, if they weren't student facing staff, they had the option to either take Labor Day as a holiday or take it as a floating day sometime between Labor Day and December 21st. So there were a lot of people that worked also, but class was in session that day. So my question, have you noticed any impacts with those narrower lanes on Vine Street? Because I drive home that way, not every day, but a lot of days, and it gets pretty tight through there.
I personally haven't. Maybe if Jill or Jason or John, if they have heard anything. I mean, from what I'm hearing, it's been okay.
This is Jason. I can comment a little bit. The answer to your question, George, is absolutely. We've had some difficulty with those small lanes during the construction phase, and we're managing as best we can, taking it a little slower going through there, things of that nature. John, on his end, we've been looking at. I think we have one stop. We've been looking at that one to see if we can make an adjustment to where that's located. But other than that, it's difficult, but we're managing right now and just taking our time, and hopefully we won't have any kind of accident or anything through there.
Okay.
I'll reiterate what Jason said, George. It's kind of a kudos to our operations department. As you know, we just had 30 days of no accidents, so our operations department really takes pride in navigating safely and seeing the adjustments they need to make, and so they're doing a great job of that. And, we've had many construction projects throughout the city and overall, especially one that just completed on Euclid, which was, thank goodness it completed in a timely manner before they indicated it would be. So we just try to reiterate and remind our folks what to do and to make sure they're, practicing the appropriate adjustments, and they're doing that. So we're very pleased with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fred, this is Harding. I don't want to get too far off topic, but just this discussion of the construction made me think of it. I know that signalizing Vine Street is in part to ease bus exits from the transit center. Do we anticipate that that's going to have an impact on the overall schedule, since I assume that we schedule in the time that they have to wait to edge out into traffic now?
We should be. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, but we, certainly as we're doing like the bay assignments and thinking about which route goes in which bay, there is a consideration of how much time is in the schedule. Because if you're in the back of the transit center, you have, it's now is a longer time to get out because of traffic. And now that we're going to be able to kind of flush the transit center all at once, there might be a few minutes that we pick up here and there, but for the most part, I think everything will run pretty similar to the way that it is now. It's just the safety issue. It's so much safer when we know we have priority. That's the biggest impact that we get from those signals.
Absolutely.
Fred, will you have control of the signals?
We will have control of the signals. I think there's going to be an emergency button, if I'm remembering this correctly, that we'll be able to trigger if we absolutely need to, but there'll be inductive loops, 2 of those. So when we stack 2 buses, then we'll signal for a priority.
Okay.
My last note that I think might be relevant to this portion, particular to the fares, is just, I don't know if I get questions sometimes. I don't know if anybody has asked you, typically at least the last few years, we get to do the big press release where we share that we're doing free rides on election day. That's not quite necessary this go around because we're not collecting fares. And so I've still been getting the question of whether or not we're going to do free rides on election day. And I've just shared with folks just a reminder that, we're not collecting fares, and folks should be able to should expect to be able to ride, and that all of the to my knowledge, and I haven't checked the last two the locations that were added, but all of the early vote and election day locations are Lextran accessible.
6 of the 8 are accessible with Lextran routes. So we have been publicizing that. And I believe it was just last night that Mayor Gorton shared something on social media. She shared one of the Lextran posts about riding to the polls. So in addition to not having the fanfare, if you will, of a free ride on election day, with the early voting and drop off boxes, the fanfare around election day is much different this year than in years past too. So but happy to let folks in the community know that they can continue with their fare free ride however they choose to vote this year.
Thanks. And if there's nothing else here, I think we can.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
All right. We did the change order report already, Christian. So I believe we are.
Did we look at the financials?
We did not. Thank you. Good catch.
That's the one time I have the financial.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Nikki was just going to let you proceed.
I thought you might have had enough financials for one day.
Yeah.
Page 77 of your board packet is the balance sheet. We're looking good. This is the 3rd month into the fiscal year. Our cash is steady right now because, like we had said earlier, because of CARES money and where we were at the end of the fiscal year. I'll go on to the revenue expenses unless someone has a question about the balance sheet. Okay. Like I said, 3 months into the fiscal year, our property taxes are about where they were last year. It's a timing issue. Between July and November, we receive a little money here and there for things such as cars and boats, motorcycles, things like that. So we will receive the bulk of the money November and December. We have a little bit of passenger revenue. We had an organization that had some money left over at the end of their fiscal year, and they wanted to go ahead and purchase some passes for future use. So you see a little bit of passenger revenue there. And our federal funds are running just about where they need to be, and all of our expenses are under budget except materials and supplies, which we know we've spent extra money with the driver barriers and some of things like that. So at this point, we're doing really well. We're under budget by $661,000 at this point, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Okay. Everybody, thanks, Nikki.
Thank you.
And Jill, you mentioned we did talk through the change order already. Any old business or new business, or can we go to proposed agenda items?
Unless any member of the board has anything for old or new, I think we can move on to the proposed agenda items. We do expect 2 resolutions in the month of November for that November board meeting. That will be a resolution for banking services, which is just our standard resolution for whom we do our banking with. And there should be a resolution for rebuilt engines at the November board meeting. Two items that are on here that we don't yet have a date for. one of the previous meetings, I believe it was Jamie Rogers who asked for a overview of our disadvantaged business enterprise program. The federal fiscal year just ended a couple of weeks ago, so we're getting all of that information submitted based on our federal funds that we use for the DBE. So once we have all of that and have a little bit of comparison, we will be ready to include that in the agenda. Not sure if we will have that ready for November, but just have that on there for a future placeholder. And then this has been on there for a little while as well. The discussion on a nepotism policy and or romantic or family relationship policy. Something for discussion at a future meeting as well that we, Christian, you and I had talked about previously to go over in a little more detail. But no date, no urgent date on that right at this moment. And then if anyone else has any proposed agenda items to add, we can do that now, or you can send those to Christian or myself at any point, and we can get those on there.
Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome.
And we don't have any need for a closed session today. Are there any, again, thoughts or questions, proposed items, anything on your heart before we adjourn this evening, this morning? Anybody have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. This is Adrian.
Thanks, Adrian. A second?
George, second.
Thanks, George. All in favor, say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? I don't think so. I'll see you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.